Hello there. This is Rosemary Krieger with the Palm Springs Modernism Show, and you are now about to listen to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. I'm Tom Guile. Joining us today are legendary Florida architect Dan Duckham and his biographer, architect and author Randy Henning. Later on, our musical guest is a talented jazz singer you'll find in cabarets all over America, Ann Hampton Calloway. And now, here's your slightly geeky host, Mr. Modernism, George Smart.
Thanks, Tom. As our most astute listeners know, I am a devoted Star Trek fan. Not devoted enough to do cosplay at conventions or create my own fan films on YouTube, but devoted enough to travel to Kingsland, Georgia, population 17,000, to visit a rundown warehouse. Let's review. Star Trek, the original series, had William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy playing Kirk and Spock in the late 60s. 79 classic shows that set the stage for what has become one of the most successful entertainment franchises in the world. There was a short-lived animated series on Saturday mornings during the 70s. Star Trek the movie came next in 1979, which was a huge commercial success from the hordes of Trek fans who, after watching, generally panned the plot as a clone of an episode from the original series, just with bigger special effects. Sorry, V'ger. There would be 5 more feature movies with the original cast, with some hits and many misses. Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, is considered the best definitive Star Trek movie of all time, with Shatner as Kirk and his nemesis Khan, brilliantly played by Ricardo Montalban. It's like Jack Lord McGarrett of Hawaii Five-0 and Kay Day of Wo-Fat fame from that same era of television. Or Robert Conrad as Jim West of Wild Wild West, and Dr. Miguelito Loveless, played by Michael Dunn, who was coincidentally in one of the original Star Trek episodes. It was the show featuring TV's first interracial kiss between Shatner as Kirk and the late Nichelle Nichols as Uhura. There will be many more Star Trek TV series, starting in 1987 with Star Trek The New Generation, with Patrick Stewart as Picard, with its own series of feature films, working all the way up to today's Star Trek, Strange New Worlds. But I digress here badly. If you want to dive deeper, like 10 hours deeper, check out the excellent documentary Center Seat on YouTube. So, why was I in Kingsland, Georgia? It turns out there are some incredibly serious fans, more serious than me, and some of them around 2012 built a complete, full replica of the Star Trek original series sound stages. Everything. The bridge, the transporter room, sick bay, the engine room, the conference room, the crew's quarters, that curvy hallway, everything all in 18,000 square feet of rundown Kingsland warehouse. Then they filmed an 11-part continuation of the Enterprise's 5-year mission called Star Trek Continues, which is also on YouTube. The Kingsland facility is called the Neutral Zone, and if you're into doing your own fan film, you can rent the sound stages. Plus, they have open house weekends every month, which is why I went. And coming up later this year on U.S. Modernist Radio, I interview Ray Tezzi and Vic Minona from the Enterprise conference room. That was awesome. But how, you might ask, is this even remotely related to architecture, which is a reasonable question? And the answer is, the original series was wildly expensive to produce because just about everything you saw on TV had to be created from scratch. I mean, it was space, a starship, not an office, not a bedroom, not a deli in New York. So the production crew, to save money, went out and bought mid-century modernist furniture designed by architects and adapted it for use on the Enterprise, as well as the planetary buildings the Enterprise would visit. Star Trek, Designing the Final Frontier, is a book written by Dan Chavkin and Brian McGuire. It came out a few years ago. It tells the story of each piece of furniture on the show and where it came from and how it was modified. We had them on as guests a few years back, and I can't wait to share this new show with you, particularly if you're a Star Trek fan. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by June Goldfinger and Jeff Taylor, sponsors of Circle, Square, Triangle, a traveling exhibition on the architecture of Myron Goldfinger, and by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Palm Springs, Malibu, Los Angeles, and Toronto.
Ohio native Dan Duckham moved to Fort Lauderdale in 1956 after graduating from Miami University of Ohio.
Go Redhawks!
With a bachelor's degree in architecture. 3 years later, in 1962, he formed his own firm, and over the last 7 decades, this young man with a bright future has completed more than 500 projects, including many modernist houses. Dan Duckham is one of the last living masters of Florida modern. And joining him on the show today is architect and author Randolph Henning, a graduate of Pompano Beach High School.
Go Golden Tornadoes!
Woo, the University of Florida.
Go Gators!
And the University of Wisconsin.
Go Badgers!
In addition to his design practice, Randy Henning writes books on architects who followed in the tradition of Frank Lloyd Wright, architects such as Alfred Browning Parker and Aaron Green, and his next book is on Dan Duckham. Welcome, Dan and Randy.
Thank you. Hey, Randy.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to be here today.
Dan, before we talk about architecture, we found a bank advertisement for the First National Bank of Fort Lauderdale from the 1950s saying you spent spring break there in the 1950s. What was spring break like then?
Wow.
Was it the bikinis and beers that we hear about in 2023?
Pretty much. Yes, pretty much the same as it is now, just probably not as many people. But it was kind of crazy. You know, I went down with another couple and my girlfriends at that point. We didn't go much to the center part of the beach, which is Las Olas Boulevard. That's where all the real activity is. We stayed north of that. But that was the year that they made the movie Where the Boys Are.
Oh, right.
And so it was pretty wild, but we were out of the wild section.
How did you wind up in a bank advertisement?
I have no idea. A bank advertisement? You mean my name was in it?
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Didn't bounce a check, I hope.
I had no connection to any banks at that particular time. Nobody knew who I was.
Now, Dan, this was a time when cruising was really big in cars specially made for that purpose.
Yeah, I guess it was. I don't think I ever participated in cruising, but I've seen it in movies more than in real life.
That wasn't happening in spring break in Lauderdale?
Oh, it was too crazy to notice anybody cruising. Everybody was either cruising around the beach or cruising down the beach, A1A. And even though it was the first couple of years, I guess, that was the year that they made the movie Where the Boys Are. That probably juiced things up quite a bit and made it even bigger.
Randy, set the stage for our listeners. Who is this Dan Duckham, and why is he so important?
That's an easy and difficult question to tackle. Dan's work has interested me and inspired me since I first laid eyes on it when I was a high school senior back in the early 70s. I went to high school, as you said already, in Pompano Beach, and that's just north of Fort Lauderdale and Oakland Park, where Dan was practicing since, like you said, the early 60s. And a young guy like me, interested in architecture, discovered Frank Lloyd Wright. I couldn't help but notice these unusual Frank Lloyd Wright-ish inspired houses and buildings throughout Broward County. So I started to speak out more and more. And finally, in the late 70s, got enough courage to actually introduce myself to Dan. And ever since then, it's been a great ride because as I told him then, I said, I'm the number one participant in your fan club. He says, I didn't realize I had a fan club. And I said, well, it's fan club with me in it, and I'm the president.
Didn't you call it a groupie?
Well, yeah, I was the Dan Duckham groupie, probably the first. Maybe not the first, but certainly I was all in back then.
Randy, how do you tell you're standing in front of a Dan Duckham house? What are some of the characteristics?
Well, the first thing you notice is different than its neighbors. Second thing you notice is it really fits within a tropical environment. It really speaks to an emotion, both aesthetically and physically and psychologically, that this house has much more value, much more worth, much more importance, much more depth than any of the neighbors have, unless there's a Dan Duckham house next door.
Right.
These houses were built of natural materials. They respected the environment. They respected the climate. And I always seem to respect the program and the budget of Dan's clients. So you really can't help but notice these projects. Yes, some of them were more inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright than others. But any architect should admit that certainly they didn't become an architect from a void. And Dan appreciated what he saw in the magazines early on, House Beautiful magazines, that type of thing. Alfred Browning Parker's work, Frank Lloyd Wright's work. And later on, he started looking into Bruce Gough's work. And certainly his career has evolved. And that's the important thing. An architect never stays. They always evolve. And Dan's work has evolved into a much more mature formula. But from the get-go, Dan's work was mature, in my opinion.
Dan, when you were first practicing and designing houses in 1950s Florida, how was modernism received? Did people love it right away, or did they bring the pitchforks and torches out?
Well, I'm not sure how to answer that question because I was a new guy in a tropical situation. I had come to that spring break before that, come with my college girlfriend, and at the end of the summer, we got together and said, now what are we going to do? So we ended up saying, well, let's go back to Fort Lauderdale. We liked it down there. We were only there for about a week, but see what happens. So we did that. She was from Iowa and I was from Ohio, so she flew down there and I drove down there, and we got back together and it worked out. And right after Christmas that year, we got married. That was in 1956. That was the same year as Where the Boys Are movie was made. And I got a job. Robert Hansen, who was the only architect that I had known about previously, he was on a magazine cover that I saw. So we got right into it. He gave me a job, and I worked for him for 2.5 years. And at the end of the 2.5 years, he was trying to put together a partnership. And I was supposed to be one of the 5 partners. Hansen, Joe Romano, and then there was another couple of young guys like myself. And that scared me. I didn't want to be Hansen, Romano, Sullivan, Hansen, and Duckham. Not that I was the last name on there. I just didn't want to start out with a partnership. So I quit and started my own practice right away. It was after 2.5 years. Looking back, I must have had a good idea what I was going to do because it got started pretty fast. I rented a little office space on A1A right off the beach. Had a small office that looked out the one window into an alley in the back. And that's where I stayed until I moved into my brand new own design building about 2, maybe 3 years later. I don't know how I was inspired to move so fast, but I guess I was impatient. I wanted to get going.
Dan, how was modernist design received in 1950s Florida? Did people like it right away, or did they criticize it?
No, I think they liked it. They liked it right away. I don't know about modernism in general. There wasn't a whole lot of it around. There was kind of ultra-modern. Some of the newer buildings in the 50s were toying around with the ultra-modern. I'm not sure where that word comes into play, but round buildings, for instance. The Kennan building was one that was built in about that time frame, and another one in South Fort Lauderdale. I think that was a part of a hotel. Randy probably remember what that was. Anyway, modern, I thought that I was received pretty well, I think. I've got clients right up front. A few of them, I don't remember how we were originally introduced. It was probably from something in the newspaper, because almost everything that I did in those early days got in one of the newspapers, I guess, of Fort Lauderdale paper, and usually a whole page or maybe more. Everybody read that paper because it was the only one. I think that's one of the ways that I can remember a couple of clients. One in particular was an older guy, a bachelor, and he said that he saw the article in the paper and he put it in his desk drawer. And every day gotten out and looked at it. And about, probably a month later, he came to see me. And it turned out to be another house job right away. Very interesting man. He's a coal mining engineer that made a major discovery in a coal mine with a huge vein that lasted for decades. So he was well known in the industry. In general, I think that I got pretty well known pretty quickly, which was a good thing, and it was a scary thing.
Randy, what were the breakthrough houses for Dan? What were the ones that really got him known in Fort Lauderdale?
It's interesting. Dan's career started right out of the gate, and he got clients that allowed him to do some of his best work early on. As Dan was saying, the Miami Herald and the Fort Lauderdale News Sun-Sentinel would often present Dan's work in the newspaper pages, home sections, Sunday sections. And this was back in the early 60s. And that certainly got a lot of attention by a lot of these people that weren't looking for just the run-of-the-mill stuff. They were looking for something more exciting. And back then, in the early 60s, there was a movement afoot in Miami, South Florida, the west coast of Florida, and Broward County, where Dan practiced. There was a lot of interest from a small group of clients, I would suppose, compared to the overall market, for something forward-looking. And Dan's work certainly fit that bill. But as far as the individual houses, I would say that the Reed House was probably one of the most important for Dan early on, because that made the cover of a magazine called Florida for Living Architecture, which was an issue that was published by the American Institute of Architects. It was going to be the inaugural issue of many issues. Unfortunately, it never surpassed its first issue. But the cover of that issue was Dan's house that he designed for the Reeds, R-E-E-D. And it's interesting that Dan never became a member of the American Institute of Architects, but yet here's the American Institute of Architects' first inaugural magazine putting his work on the cover. And this was in the early 60s, so very early out of the box for Dan.
And I understand that the Benson residence also got a lot of publicity.
I don't think it had any major thing. It was my first house. It was for a friend, one of my early friends that had a boat, and he was the only one that had a boat. So on Sundays, we would go out with him. And ultimately, he bought a lot in the Sea Ranch Lakes on the Intercoastal Waterway, and he asked me to design a house for him. Didn't have much in the way of experience, my experience, to base that choice on. I guess we had a lot of conversation and things, but anyway, he became my first real house client. I did another very small house just a couple blocks from my office for another new friend. His mother was a friend of my aunt's in college way back. So it's interesting how the friendships kind of evolved from relatives and people that I knew, and one thing led to another. And Chuck Packard, I think that was his name. Yeah, Chuck Packard house. I think it had a newspaper article.
Yeah, yes, it did.
It's hard to go back that far and remember the details, but one thing led to another. And then there was some architectural competition for Fort Lauderdale News. Had some architectural competitions in those early years, 2 or 3 years after I started. I guess my work was unique enough for its time that they always made the newspaper, and the newspapers generated more interest in clients. It's just an evolution. I was busy, and we just cranked them out. I thought that's what you're supposed to do.
Randy, as both an architect and an author writing a book on Dan, what distinguished Dan's houses in terms of materials? What did he choose to put them together that was significant?
Dan used materials that many of the other architects of 20th century, mid-century homes would use. Wood, cedar shakes, flat roofs. He used exposed concrete block, stack, or running bond. But Dan was able to put these materials together in such a way that there was a unified logic to it. The proportions were always correct, and the balances were always maintained between the solids, the voids, the glass, as well as the way the planes, exterior planes, vertical and horizontal planes of these houses kind of intersected. So they were very logically designed, unified whole. And that's what really bears fruit when you look at one of his houses.
You can see Dan's houses as we're going along, with information supplied by Dan and Randy at usmodernist.org/Duckham. That's Duckham. Randy, as students look at Dan's work, what can they learn? What can they use to apply towards houses they're designing today?
Well, Dan used the formula and then didn't use the formula. It's a sense of unified proportions, massing, things of that nature. Dan's work, it creates a style, but it's not created from a style. It's not a preconception. So that the idea for the students these days is to look at these houses and understand that Dan didn't start with an exterior aesthetic in mind. He started with the problem, and he solved that problem from the inside out.
Dan, in addition to houses, you've completed over 75 restaurant and bar projects. So I wanted to ask you, what makes a great restaurant other than the food, structurally?
I don't know about structure, but again, I tried to do them in an organic way. So there was always a lot of wood on the inside. First restaurant was the Down Under, which was new construction. So that was all wood and old brick, I think, used brick. I guess the organic part of it was the structure. I think some of the early ones had heavy timber and not so much sculptural in nature. Like some of the houses, I thought in terms of elements, not so much in terms of beams and decking and open areas, but three-dimensional elements that bisected and emerged out of each other, changing materials sometimes from a hard material, concrete block or stone, to wood. Generally, was always a lot of wood. Sometimes site problems would generate a different take on how we evolved a project, too. I think one of the earlier ones had a soil problem. We just couldn't support it without driving piling. And piling were expensive, and it was a 1,000-square-foot house for another bachelor friend. So what we did was build it on the ground, build it up off the ground, but not a crawl space. It was just off the ground, a foot and a half or something like that, and made it a very light house.
Randy, you've written extensively on Alfred Browning Parker, another architect in Florida, whose houses are beginning to be destroyed. How are Dan's houses holding up?
That's a good question. I think Mr. Parker's houses, for the most part, have either been destroyed or remodeled beyond recognition. Most of Dan's work is starting to experience that. A lot of his houses have been repainted white. I don't know why the new owners like the color of white, but I guess if you live in South Florida, white is the go-to, I suppose. But many of his homes are falling into disrepair, unfortunately, because the original owners are no longer there, and they're not respected by the buyers that come in after the original owners, and they make their changes to suit themselves. Some of the houses have become problems in that the wood and the roofs, if you don't maintain these houses, issues come up. I saw pictures of the McQuaid house recently, and the front door that Dan designed as a slab door with some ornament on it was replaced with a 5-panel door, I believe it is, just out of the stock catalogs. Just a total disrespect of the original house. These people that buy these things, for whatever reason, don't seem to understand or respect what they purchased.
Well, do they know? I mean, are the real estate agents telling them this is a Dan Duckham house?
That's a good question.
I don't think that was well known yet at that point, but the same thing happened 20, 30 years later with other houses. But just that somebody that liked the location on the beach or whatever and decided to put their own touch on the house. Pretty bizarre how some of them worked out.
Recently, Dan had mentioned to me that the house he designed for himself and his wife that was built outside of Cashiers, North Carolina, he recently sold that several years ago. And the new owner basically demolished it.
Oh, my Lord.
Just totally.
That's a beautiful house. I've seen photos of it.
Yeah, it was nothing left but a retaining wall. I haven't actually seen it, but I know that they said it's gone.
I am so sorry.
But I didn't mind that because I built it for my wife, Mary, at the time. We were married for 50 years, and we lived in that house for 40 years, I think. A long time. And then it was torn down. I said, well, we were the only ones that ever inhabited that house, and I did not mind that concept at all.
Well, that's a very generous way of looking at it, Dan.
It is. Better that you enjoyed it with your wife than anybody else.
Randy, when is the book going to be available?
My hope is, if I can retire from my current architectural practice, I'll have more time to complete that book in 2024, late 2024 probably.
Well, I'm really looking forward to seeing it. Dan, Randy, thank you so much for spending time with us today. It's nice to talk with you, both you, Dan, and your number one fan.
Thank you, George.
Thank you, George.
Ann Hampton Calloway is a Tony-nominated, multi-platinum-selling pop jazz singer-songwriter who has been inducted into the Women Songwriters Hall of Fame. She was named Broadway World's 2022 Entertainer of the Year and Best Jazz Vocalist by that publication 2 times. You've heard her theme song to the hit TV show The Nanny, which has been getting a lot of attention lately since the title character, Fran Drescher, was involved in last summer's Hollywood strike. And she's also appeared in films such as The Good Shepherd. Her latest album, Finding Beauty Originals Volume 1, debuted on Amazon as the #1 new release in jazz. So we are very happy to welcome you, Ann.
What a pleasure to be on your show. Thank you so much.
So, Ann, The Nanny is becoming a TV classic now, much like Golden Girls before that. How did you come to do the theme song?
Well, it started way back when I was doing a show in New York City of original songs in the 80s, believe it or not. And Fran Drescher was an unknown, like we were both getting started. And my sister was in a Broadway show, and her best friend said, hey, Fran, why don't we go and check out Liz Callaway's sister, Ann Hampton Calloway, is doing original songs. Well, she loved my show so much, she stayed back, waited in line, and said, oh, my God, you're so talented. We have to work together. And so for years, I wrote theme songs for these events, these shows that never went anywhere. And then she called me about The Nanny. And I had this feeling that this was the one. So I was competing with a lot of top Hollywood writers. And I, being the daughter of a journalist, really helped out because I asked her, can we talk on the phone and tell me in a nutshell who the nanny is? And so in that conversation, I said, well, really, how would you summarize your character? And she said, well, she's the lady in red when everyone else is wearing tan. And I thought, what a fabulous, brilliant line. I have to write that in the theme song. And she fell in love with the song. And I said, you should have the Manhattan Transfer record this song. She said, now we want you. And I never dreamed that it would be one of the most syndicated shows in TV history. CNN's Don Lemon said it was the most significant TV theme in TV history. And I was like, how did this all happen? I'm so happy it did happen. It's a lot of fun. I've been to Germany and done concerts where Ella Fitzgerald did her big live concert, and the entire audience knew the song. It was just unbelievable.
Do they sing along?
They knew all the words, and they sang with their German accents. I was just blown away.
That must have been surreal.
And Fran, by the way, is just an amazing woman. I'm so proud of the work she's doing for SAG-AFTRA.
Yeah. Finding Beauty is your first album. It's all original songs.
That's right. It's a 40-year dream come true. When I was starting my life out, that's what I wanted to do. And it's hard to believe it took this long to get it out there, but it's been well worth the wait.
Well, we're going to hear a song from that now. This is Ann with Forever and a Day.
Lucky can I be to have you loving me? It truly means I have it all. To know that you'll be there, no matter when or where, to catch me if I stumble or I fall. Thank you too for all the thoughtful things you do to make me feel as safe as one can be. deserves a star, like when we said our first hello, and you where it would go. Just look, my love, at where we are. As sure as suns will shine and moons will light the skies, I'm the one who holds the prize. I know how lucky all this is, though it may sound cliché. This is forever and a day. I'd like to thank you too for all the thoughtful things you do to make me feel as safe as one can be. So grateful for the memories made together. And may I add, each one deserves a star. When we said our first hello, and you where it would go. Just look, my love, at where we are. As sure as suns will shine and moons will light the skies, I'm the one who holds the prize. I know how lucky all this is, though it may sound cliché. This is forever and a day.
That is really beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Do you know who wrote the words to that song?
No.
It wasn't me. I wrote the music, but it was the Oscar-winning, legendary Alan Bergman who wrote The Way We Were and
yes.
some of the greatest songs of the 20th century. So you can imagine what a thrill it was to finally get to collaborate with him.
That was Alan and Marilyn, right?
Yes, Marilyn Bergman passed away last January. And so when I recorded this, it was originally going to be for a project my sister, Liz Callaway, was going to do, but she wasn't ready to do it yet. So she said, well, why don't you just go ahead and record it yourself? And so I was thinking of my love and how poignant it might be to him. And I just received a beautiful email saying how much he enjoyed the recording, and it makes me very happy. But yeah, it's a little bittersweet having lost his incredible wife and collaborator. They were one of the great loves ever.
One of the great couples in American music, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Now, I want to find out, what is Dial a Diva? That sounds pretty interesting.
Well, Dial a Diva happened in February of 2020. It was an idea I had when I saw where things were going and that the pandemic was going to happen. And I thought, I'm going to have to restructure what I do because obviously I'm not going to be able to travel. So I thought, if you need a song, if you need a performance, where do you go? Dial this diva. And so I wrote about 50 songs for people to help the celebration going, to honor their, birthdays, anniversaries, the passing of people they loved. I had all kinds of concerts for people all over the world. I broadcasted out of my home, and it was a very fascinating experience because I got to know so many people and make so many deep friendships from this experience. And now I have a really busy touring schedule, so Dial a Diva has dialed down a bit, but
Okay.
Whenever I have time to write songs for people, I still try to fit that in, and it's a pleasure.
And before COVID, you toured with a huge number of symphony orchestras. You played with them all over the country doing the Streisand work.
Yeah, I have numerous shows. I think the Streisand Songbook is probably the most successful show. And part of it is the fact that I know Barbra Streisand. I've written platinum hits for her. She's been a big influence on me. And I also was lucky to get some of her arrangers to arrange these magnificent pieces for me that are my own versions of these great songs. And
now, what songs did you write for her?
One of the songs I wrote, I recorded on my new CD, Finding Beauty Originals Volume 1, called At the Same Time. And that was something she released in 1997. And she sold 9 million records of that song through the many years. She's had it on compilation CDs. And I wrote it, and I just thought, I want her to record this. And it took 10 years for that to happen. But I got to hear her sing it live at Madison Square Garden and on television. And now that the Ukraine war is happening, still, I feel like this song is really needed. And I hope my arrangement of it, which has military drums in it, it has a very haunting quality. I hope it will reach many ears too. But she also recorded my wedding song that I wrote for her. And I just sent her a copy of New Words for her 25th anniversary with James Brolin. And she also recorded a song I wrote called Christmas Lullaby for her second beautiful Christmas record. So I've been very fortunate, and I'm going to be hopefully trying to get a duet on her next CD. So fingers crossed.
There you go. Fingers crossed. Right.
Yeah.
Well, this next song, music by Dan Levine and lyrics by Ann, is from the album. It's called Stealing Away.
Stealing away, there's not a place we need to be. Stealing away, taking some time for you and me. The road is ours underneath the stars. Stealing away, just like the waves crashing along the winding shore. We've got a love that keeps us coming back for more. We can't resist all we've missed. Stealing away, we're off to have a lover's rendezvous, pretending we've got nothing else to do. And in a little hideaway hotel, no one will find us. We're gonna We're off to have a lover's rendezvous, pretending we got nothing else to do. And in our little hideaway hotel, no one will find us. We're gonna turn the lights down sweet and low, and take it just as slow as we can go. We're leaving all our cares and all our worries far behind. Finally, you and me, where we wanna be happily. On our way to heaven on the hill, gonna have the thrill of the sea. Finally, you and me, where we wanna be happily. On our way to heaven on the hill, gonna have the thrill of the sea, stealing away.
Okay, Ann, so I got an idea for you.
What's that?
This has got to be the new theme song for a cruise line.
Oh.
Like Carnival or Royal Caribbean. I mean...
Oh my God, I never thought of that. What a great idea.
I mean, Kathy Lee's not doing it anymore, so you could go jump right in there and be the new spokesperson for these cruise lines that are just going crazy, letting those couples steal away.
I am doing some pretty sexy cruises. I'm doing a Polynesian cruise for Vakaya next week. We're going to 3 Hawaiian islands, and I'm going to definitely, thank you for saying that. I'll definitely need to sing this song on the cruise. But yeah, actually, it never even occurred to me about cruise. I always think of like a little sports car winding through Highway 1 in California or something like that. But
that works too.
That's a great idea.
I'm thinking like this couple on the Lido deck when I hear that song.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I've had spending a lot of time. We call that the libido deck sometimes.
Ann's website is annhamptoncalloway.com, and her new album is Finding Beauty Originals Volume 1. Thanks so much, Ann, for joining us.
It was such a pleasure. Thank you so much. I love the songs you chose, by the way. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by June Goldfinger and Jeff Taylor, sponsors of Circle Square Triangle, a traveling exhibition on the architecture of Myron Goldfinger, and by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Malibu, Toronto, Los Angeles, and Palm Springs.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 20,000 significant modernist houses, and access 4.3 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Kelly Policelli handles guest research. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I will be back soon with another edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.